Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yep, what's good, original crew, man? We're back today with another Ballen. I'm finna go another rap, but I said stop. I'm finna go into a whole nother spiel. Oh, man. Hey, another round of Mr. Ballen. The most credible cases of broken reality. This must be a witch call. You know what I'm talking about? Nah, you don't. All right. I'll be tripping my own self out. Hey, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go. If you want the first part, you gotta do it. Check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
lock it in with a thumbs up.
Bro, I don't feel like we had a new Mr. Ballen this long in a minute. Or is it just me?
I don't think we have.
I feel like typically that'd be like the most almost 30 minutes. This almost 40. Okay, Ballen, I see you, brother. Let's go. Let's check it out. Let's see what it's about. You ready?
I'm ready.
Today, I'm going to tell you two stories. The first story is about this woman in China who goes on a hike into this beautiful forest, and it quickly spirals into a complete nightmare. And the second story is about this small village in Taiwan where this very strange event happens. And it spooks the villagers so badly that the Taiwanese government actually investigated. And what they discovered defies any logical explanation. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, on the like button's birthday, offer to bring the cake. But when you sing them happy birthday, make sure you replace the candles with TNT. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Early on the morning of February 16th, 2020, a 39-year-old woman named Faye stepped out of a convenience store in a small village in China. She was wearing a bright red distinctive coat, and in her hands were a whole bunch of snacks that she had just purchased. So Faye had lived in this village her whole life. She was a very simple person, and she had a really specific daily schedule that she basically always adhered to. And it was, she would get up early, she would throw on her jacket, and she would head out to this convenience store, get some snacks, and then she would either go back home where she lived with her husband, or she would go to her parents' house or her sister's house to pay them a visit. And that was basically what she did every single day. And so this day had started exactly the same as every other day. And after she left the store and she began eating some snacks and, thinking about where she was gonna go next, whether it was her house or a relative's house, she's walking down this road when suddenly she hears people calling out to her. And so she stops and she turns, and there are these 5 people that are clustered together standing at the top of this trailhead. So Faye's village was home to this beautiful hiking trail that started right where these people were standing. The trail went up this mountainside and up into this huge forest where there were all these ponds and waterfalls. I mean, it was strikingly beautiful. And that area, the forest with all the ponds, was called the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. It was called that because there were literally 18 ponds sort of scattered throughout this forest. And then also the village where Faye lived that was right up against it, well, it meant Dragon King in Chinese. But even though Faye had grown up here, she had never once gone on that hiking trail. She had heard about it, and loads of her friends and family had all been up there and talked about its striking beauty. But Faye, she had always stayed away. But there was actually a pretty good reason for that. So Faye, when she was younger, she had this tumor. And in order to get rid of it, she had to take all this medication that was pretty physically harmful and left her with some pretty serious long-term effects. And even though the tumor, did go away and she recovered, that process of recovering and taking all those medications and going to the doctor, it sort of instilled in her this mentality that she was frail and delicate and that she shouldn't take any chances and risk getting hurt. And so she really never did anything that was even remotely risky or even perceived to be risky. Like, for example, hiking up into the mountains. Too risky for her, and so she avoided it. And instead, she kind of developed this really simple, safe daily routine of getting snacks and visiting family, and that's all she ever did. And while in some ways this did, keep Faye safe, it also made her very isolated and lonely. She didn't really have any friends or do anything. She was just kind of stuck in her ways. And so Faye is on this road, and these villagers, these 5 villagers over at the trailhead, have just deliberately called to her by name. They're saying, "Hey, Faye, over here." And Faye's turned and she's looking at them, and they're clearly getting ready to go hike up into the 18 ponds of the Dragon King. And they tell her, "Hey, come with us, come hiking with us, come check it out." And for Faye, this was so unusual. This was not even remotely how her life went, that there was something in her that for a second just felt really excited. I mean, she did sort of rely on her schedule and her discipline of doing the same thing every day. It kept her safe. But this sudden invitation from these people, these villagers, it just felt like, why not? Why not do something different for once? And she's also thinking, how dangerous can it be? I'm with other people. They seem really competent. Maybe this is a good idea. Maybe I'll just go with them. What the heck? See what happens. And so Faye found herself just sort of drifting over to these very friendly 5 people and saying, "You know what? What the heck? Yeah, I'll come with you. I've never been up there. I'm sure it's great. Let's go." And so sure enough, Faye and her newfound 5 friends from the village, they begin hiking up this trail. And over the next couple of hours, Faye is seeing a beautiful landscape that she was so close to her whole life that now she's seeing for the first time. And it's like revelatory. She can't believe that she's lived this close to this majesty for so long and she's never seen it. This was a life-changing experience for her. And so her mood is just so good. And these 5 people are so wonderful, and they're all chattering and talking about their lives. And, Faye's opening up about hers and her health scares and all these different things. And eventually, they make their way into this forest, which is really dense, but they eventually reach one of these ponds, one of the 18 ponds, and it's got this huge clearing, and all the sunlight's pouring in, and there's a waterfall leading into the pond. It's truly stunningly beautiful. And Faye's friends, they all take a seat right on the shore of the pond, and they break out some snacks. And Faye, she sits down, she's got those snacks she bought from the convenience store. And they basically have a picnic right on the shore. And for Faye, it was like this was the most amazing day, potentially, of her whole life. She had broken out of her comfort zone. She had met these wonderful people who were so inclusive. And here she is experiencing this unbelievable natural beauty, like the day couldn't get any better. But as she was sitting there on the side of the pond, enjoying this beautiful scene, she started to feel really intensely fatigued. And at first she's thinking, oh, of course, I don't really get out much and exercise much, and I just hiked up this mountain into this forest. Of course I'm tired. But she felt herself kind of slumping back on the rock she was on and almost like positioning herself like she might lay down and sleep. And then before long, it was like the world around her began getting hazy, and she could see her friends still talking, and they weren't really looking at her. They're just kind of enjoying their food. And then it was like Faye just could not keep her eyes open, and she put her head down, closed her eyes, and she fell asleep. When Faye woke up again, she was still laying in that same spot, but now it was dark. And also, her 5 friends were gone. She was all alone next to this pond in the middle of this forest. And for Faye, it was like immediately this jolt of panic rocketed through her. She starts looking around for these, friends of hers. They've got to be here somewhere. They wouldn't just abandon her. They were so nice. How could this possibly be? But she's looking around and all she can see is just darkness. There's some moonlight coming through the clearing over the pond, but when she looked into the tree line, it was just all dark and there's no one. All she can hear is birds and insects, night sounds. And remember, Faye is not somebody who would ever find herself in this position. This is so far out of her comfort zone. Alone at night in this forest, in this austere environment, suddenly it felt very austere, and she's terrified. And at the same time, her mind starts telling her, oh my gosh, this whole thing was a trap. Those 5 people weren't my friends. They brought me up here. They tricked me. They drugged me, or maybe they've left and they're gonna come back and hurt me. And so she's thinking like, oh, I'm in danger. I have to get out of here. And she turns and she looks at the trail that brought them up here. And all she sees is just this dark tree line. And there's this cut path through the trees that's basically pitch black. And she's thinking, I have to walk through that alone in the middle of the night. She didn't have a light or anything that would help guide her way out of here. But as she's sitting there panicking, she's thinking, I have to go right now, like it's life or death. And so she stands up and immediately she feels really weak on her feet. Like she's super fatigued still, but it's like adrenaline is coursing through her body. She's got to get out of here. And she starts stumbling her way into the tree line where it's super dark. And she's trying to stay on this trail, but she keeps deviating because it's so dark. And she's bumping into trees and she keeps hearing noises all around her that she's convinced are these 5 people coming back to hurt her or animals or she doesn't know what. I mean, she is in full panic mode here, but just for hours or what felt like hours, she just stumbled through these trails, getting completely disoriented. And finally she comes to the stream and she just stops and she's sitting there and she realizes, the sun is starting to come up. So she kneels down and she scoops some water into her mouth. And right as the sun comes up across the mountainside, there's enough light that miraculously she realizes she can actually see a path down the side of the mountain that she believes will bring her back to her village. Like she's gonna get out of here unscathed, presumably. And so she kind of catches her breath, she gets another sip from the stream, and then with the help of the sunlight, she navigated her way to this trail that she could see, and down the mountain she went. And as she was going down this mountain, she looked down towards her village, and she saw clearly there was a big group of people, presumably villagers, out looking for her, that were right down on the trail, sort of like the beginning of the trail. And Faye, she's waving and calling out to them, and a few of the people in the crowd, they're looking up at her, and maybe from the distance they couldn't really tell who she was or what she was doing, but there was some level of recognition, but she couldn't really tell what the reaction of the crowd was. But she had gotten their attention, and Faye's so excited, and down the hill she goes. Suddenly she feels totally rejuvenated because she's gonna be okay, and she gets closer to this big crowd of people, and she sees now it's friends, it's family, it's definitely her people. But the looks on their faces are not the looks that Faye is expecting. I mean, she did understand that, clearly I've been out here at least for several hours. They must have organized the search party. They've been worried about me, but here I am. Like, they gotta be relieved now, right? Like, they found me. But no, the looks on all these people's faces were of shock, were of horror, not really sure what to make of Faye coming down the mountainside toward them. And then when Faye got close enough to the group that she could actually make out individual faces, Faye saw her sister in the crowd. And she waved to her sister and said, "Hey, I'm okay, it's okay, everything's fine, like come on, everything's fine." And Faye's sister kind of broke ranks very hesitantly, and then she finally jogs up to Faye and the two embrace, and it's this really emotional moment. And Faye's sister says to Faye, "Where have you been?" And Faye kind of steps back from her and says, "Oh, yesterday or a few hours ago, I don't know, I kind of lost track of time, but I think it was yesterday. I saw these 5 people and, we kind of made our way into the mountains. I don't know, I shouldn't have done it, but I fell asleep and, here I am. I'm so sorry if I scared you, but I'm okay." But Faye's sister, it's like she was hearing what Faye was saying, but couldn't process it. And eventually her sister kind of stepped back and looked at Faye and just said, "That can't be true. You've been gone for 17 days. Damn. Faye didn't really have time to appreciate what she had just been told, nor did the group really have time to appreciate that Faye apparently has shown back up again. Because pretty much immediately, Faye was rushed to the hospital where doctors discovered she had lost 60 pounds. She was horribly malnourished and dehydrated. I mean, they didn't understand how she was still alive. And while Faye is being treated, she began to hear what had happened over the past 17 days she had been gone. They had security footage that showed when Faye went into the woods because she had on that bright red distinctive coat. They caught her walking into the forest. There she goes. So they knew she was up in the 7.5-mile stretch, which is this, 18 Ponds of the Dragon King. It's a distinctive 7.5-mile plot. They knew she had to be up there. And also because this was around the time of COVID, there were really strict checkpoints of all the other villages in the area. So anybody going in and out of these villages, they'd be documented. And they knew Faye had not gone into any of the surrounding villages. So she had to be in the 18 Ponds of the Dragon King, that 7.5-mile stretch. But despite launching a huge search party into that 7.5-mile stretch to go look for her, and also firing off fireworks left and right to try to get her attention, not only did nobody find any trace of Faye, but Faye would also say, "I never heard fireworks, I never heard or saw any searchers." From her perspective, it literally felt like she had just fallen asleep for a few hours and woken up, and here she was, not 17 days. But eventually, Faye would actually go into detail about the specifics of what she remembered about this ordeal. Namely, she would talk about those 5 people, her new friends, who sort of encouraged her to go up into the 18 pawns of the Dragon King. And she remembered their names, what they looked like. She remembered discussions she had with them. And she painted them as wonderful people, but it's like she just woke up and they were gone. And so she thought, maybe they had tricked her and, maybe they drugged her and that's why she can't remember this stuff, or she didn't know what, but she couldn't reconcile the fact that they seemed like such nice people, but must have had something to do with what's happened here. But after Faye said that, her family, they kind of looked at each other like, Faye, those can't be the 5 people you were with. And Faye's like, why? And they're like, because the 5 people you named and described, they've been dead for a long time. Now, Faye was incredulous, but when they reviewed the security footage that showed Faye clearly in her bright red distinctive coat walking up the trail into the 18 pawns, there was nobody else with her. Those 5 people, they're not on camera. So the 18 pawns of the Dragon King is not just a beautiful hiking destination. It's also believed to be haunted. Locals claim that when they look up at the mountainside that the trail passes through and then up to that forest as well, they can sometimes see these eerie blue lights moving around in the trees that nobody can explain. There's a story that, people that have died, their spirits sort of haunt this area looking for living people to switch places with. In fact, when Faye began coming down the mountainside and she looked and saw that huge crowd of people that she believed was basically, her search party out to look for her, well, in reality, that wasn't the case. One of the locals had looked up and seen what he thought was another one of those lights, not a blue light, but a red light. It was Faye's red jacket. He had seen this red thing bouncing around off in the distance, and he thought it was, one of these strange lights, a ghost, let's say. And so he had told people in the village, and everybody was really excited, and they ran out to go see what it was, and it sort of was a ghost. It was Faye, who'd been gone for 17 days coming down the mountain, and nobody could believe it. They were so shocked. And so to this day, nobody knows what actually happened to Faye. All we know is we have her on camera disappearing into this trail, into this forest, in the mountainside, and then turning back up 17 days later. Keep in mind, before this, the longest anybody had survived out there after getting lost was 12 days, and it was this young man who was really fit, who barely survived. Faye was in horrible shape, and she was out there for 17 days, but somehow she showed up alive. Faye still lives in the village today, and her story, at least from her perspective, has never changed.
That's right there. It's weird and bizarre, bro.
Yeah, that's a crazy story.
Because I was like, did she fall asleep into like a coma state? I'm like, that doesn't make sense, man.
But then it would kind of make sense, right? Because
but how was she
17 days, right? She remembered falling asleep.
But her body would have to still feed off something if she was in a coma state, right? I guess it's feeding off itself.
Yeah.
But without water, I
don't know. It's one of those type of stories. Can't explain it.
She don't even know. Did she? I want to have like medically. Has she ever experienced anything? I'm saying like medically.
Other than what he stated.
Like, has she ever had like seizures or any type of medical thing that has happened to her? You know what I'm saying?
I'm saying other than what he stated, because he did say that she had got sick at one point and she was on medication, and that's the reason why she never But other than that, I'm not sure, but that's a crazy story. But when it said that she woke up and the people was gone, I'm thinking, it's the next day. And I was like, were those actually people? But my mind went there. But
with her not knowing how long she was like, just... Because you know how you can sleep? And you can sleep for 2 hours, but it feels like you've been asleep for like 12 hours. But you can sleep for like 12 hours and think it's only been 2 hours. Yeah. Maybe it's one of those things, But for 17 days.
That's a long time.
And it was out searching the area and nobody stumbled over her.
That's
the scary part. Or unless they just didn't check the area she was in. But you would think they would have.
Yeah.
Unless they didn't. Because sometimes they do search for people and they be like, we swear we searched over there, but y'all didn't search all of over there.
Yeah.
Y'all searched just the vast, what y'all believe to, and then, oh, no way. And then that's where they be at. Weird story, though, bro.
Yeah.
Weird, crazy story. Will they ever get answers? Probably not. Because she can't even, she's not going to remember anything.
No.
Perspective has never changed. One morning in the spring of 1959, a middle-aged civil engineer named Wu Chiu biked through his rural town in Taiwan. He was on his way home from work, and normally he sort of enjoyed this bike ride home. He would take his time and look at the beautiful temple and all the marketplaces. But today, he was not looking at the scenery. He was in a huge rush because he had gotten word that his wife had become horribly sick. And so Wu is pedaling as fast as he possibly can, trying to get home to his wife to help her and take care of her. But as he got to his neighborhood, he started to realize that he was really gassed. Like literally pedaling to his house was just unbelievably exhausting. Now he was sort of sprinting, but at the same time, Wu was a pretty athletic guy. And so this type of a ride was something that he should have been able to handle. But it just sort of seemed like there was a weight attached to him, like he was pulling an extra 100 pounds or something. But regardless, Wu pushed through the pain, knowing he had to get to his wife at all costs, and he turned the corner onto his street, and as he was making his final approach to his house, he saw one of his neighbors. And even though Wu was completely in a rush, he was also very polite. And so even though he's like, sweating and hustling, he still took the time to turn and wave to his neighbor. And his neighbor, who clearly looked at Wu, made eye contact with him, saw it was Wu. Instead of waving back, they kind of scowled at Wu, like they were disgusted by him. They didn't wave back and they turned and just went the other way. And Wu's like, what was that about? What did I do? But again, Wu has to get home. So he sort of wrote that off and he's like, okay, keep on pedaling. He gets even closer to his house. And then it just so happens another neighbor comes outside. And again, Wu's politeness comes through and he's like sweating profusely. He's like, hey, how are you? And this neighbor as well looks at Wu with this look of total disdain on their face. Like there's something wrong with Wu. And Wu's like, what did I do? What's going on here? And so that neighbor does not wave back. They go back inside their house. But again, Wu really can't focus on this weirdness with his neighbors. He needs to get home to his wife. And so again, with his heavy legs, he finally gets to his house, parks his bike, and runs inside to see his wife. Wu would find his wife in their bedroom, in bed, and she was looking very pale and sick. Her name was Lin Wang Yao. She was 37 years old, and generally speaking, she was a pretty frail person who was sort of prone to minor illnesses all the time. And so, Wu was sort of accustomed to her not doing so well. But as soon as he saw his wife, he could tell that whatever was going on with her was serious. This was not one of her typical bouts of, minor illnesses. Something was wrong here. And so Wu immediately began to tend to his wife. He made her some soup and some tea, but, Lin barely could sip either of them. And Lin also, she had this fever that just kept getting worse and worse. And, Wu was hoping she would break the fever at some point. But, all night as Wu was up tending to her, her fever just kept getting worse. And so Wu, he really didn't know what to do. And this is 1959. They're in a rural village in Taiwan. And so it was difficult to get to a hospital. And so Wu really wanted to find a way to treat his wife at home. And he was just praying that, over the next 24 hours or so, she would show signs of getting better. But over the next couple of days, Lin did not get better. Her fever never broke. She basically stopped eating and drinking. And it was like she was drifting in and out of consciousness. And then finally, after 3 days of this, Wu knew, like, if I don't get my wife to a hospital, no matter how hard it is to do that, like, she might not make it. The primary hurdle for Wu to get Lin to the hospital was actually just transportation. He didn't have a car, but he did know that one of his neighbors on his street had a donkey cart. And so he could maybe load his wife into that and they could get her to the hospital in the cart. And so Wu, he went outside and he found the neighbor who happened to be outside, actually with their donkey cart, and he flagged them down and he asked them if they'd be willing to transport Lin to the hospital in their cart. But just like a few days earlier, when Wu had been biking on his street and his neighbors had been totally weird to him and sort of looked at him with these obvious looks of disgust, this neighbor, who knew Wu really well, looked at Wu and basically gave him one of those looks, like, you gross person, and he turned around like he wasn't even gonna talk to Wu. But then Wu, in desperation, just says, look, my wife, she's dying. She needs to get to the hospital. Please do it for her. And at that, this neighbor, clearly despite their misgivings, sort of turns back around and says, fine, we can use the cart and get her to the hospital. And so Wu and this neighbor, they go into Wu's house, they scoop up Lin, they put her on the cart, and it takes several hours, but they do eventually get her to the hospital. And by the time they're there, Lin is basically unconscious. They rush her inside, and the doctors and nurses, they try to do everything they can to stabilize Lin. But as soon as she was admitted, it was like her condition only got worse and worse. And that night, she slipped into a coma, and then she died. Wu was devastated. He and the neighbor took Lin's body, put it back on the donkey cart, and brought it back to their town. And then Wu began setting up for a funeral service. So in Taiwan, it's customary during funerals to have the body of the loved one be brought into the house where it stays for 7 days before they're cremated. And so Wu, after getting Lin's body back home, he put her into a coffin, set her up in the living room, and then over the next several days, Wu was at home next to his dead wife as friends and family, and even the neighbors who, clearly had some issue with Wu, they all came in to pay their respects. And while this was happening, Wu, who was already devastated at the loss of his wife, as he would listen to people come in and pray over the body and sort of talk to the body as if she was still alive and talk about how wonderful she was, it really hit Wu hard because it was like he was suddenly realizing how different his life was going to be without his wife. Lin was a very simple woman. She was illiterate, she really didn't travel, and she was very introverted and quiet, but she was a wonderful wife. She took care of Wu. She cared about him deeply. She was a wonderful cook. And just generally, she made people around her feel safe and happy. And so, Wu, it's like he just found himself over and over having these fits of just crying. Like he can't believe that Lin is now gone. But on the third day after Lin had passed away, so now we're about halfway through this funeral service, which takes about a week, Wu was in his living room dealing with this overwhelming sadness about losing his wife, and there's this procession of people coming in and out of the house. And as Wu was sitting there, there was sort of a cadence and a rhythm to how the days were going. But at some point, it was like everybody in the room just suddenly went completely silent, and then people began to gasp. And Wu, he was sort of head down, dealing with his sadness, and he sort of noticed the change in the room, and he heard people gasping, and he looked up, and he noticed a few of the mourners. They weren't just gasping, they were open-mouthed and horrified, and they were looking at the casket. And so Wu went from the mourners, and he looks over at the casket, and there, in this open casket, is Lin, except now she's sitting upright, looking around the room, clearly alive. Now, at first, Wu's reaction was, oh my goodness, my wife must have just slipped into a really deep coma, so deep that the doctors could not distinguish it from death. And so this is a mistake. Like she was never dead. She's just, waking up from her coma. But at the same time, as Wu's having this immediate reaction to seeing his wife sitting up in her coffin, he's thinking, but over these 3 days that I've not left her side, I've been with her body the whole time. She's not moved, she's not made a sound, she's certainly not had anything to eat or drink. Like this just doesn't seem possible. And so Wu and the other mourners, after the shock of seeing this sort of wore off, everybody kind of jumped into action and they rushed over to the casket and they very gently lifted Lin out of the casket and they carried her over to her bed and they laid her down, and Lin immediately kind of gestured for water. She was too weak to speak. She had lost a bunch of weight, but she's gesturing for water, and so I give her some water and she sips the water, and everyone's looking at Wu like, we have to get her to the hospital. Like, what else can we possibly do? But Wu, he's looking at his wife and she's so frail. She really seems like now she is on the precipice of dying here. And he's thinking, she can't survive another donkey cart ride to the hospital. And so we have to keep her here and hope that she, recovers enough that maybe in a day or two we could bring her to the hospital, but certainly not now. And so over the next couple of hours, Wu, along with some friends and family, just stayed by Lin's bedside, constantly checking on her, making sure she really was alive. And, she was, albeit, very subdued, but she continued to drink water and had a little food. And amazingly, over the span of only a few hours, Lin went from basically literally being dead to actually seeming to get a whole lot better. In fact, to the point where, Lynn was actually sitting up in bed and, stretching and moving around as if she was completely fine. In fact, in Wu's opinion, it almost seemed like within a few hours, she was actually physically almost better off than she was normally when she was alive. Like, it was a miracle how quickly she was recovering. And so by that night, when Lynn really did seem like she was effectively back to her normal self, the mourners all left and said, okay, well, I guess Lynn's okay. And they left, and then it was just Wu and Lynn. And Wu had no idea how to handle any of this. He was just so grateful that his wife was alive, even though, again, none of this made any sense. Like, this is so shocking. But he's just grateful that she's alive. The next day, when they woke up, Lynn was so much better that she was out of bed, walking around the house, really excited to face the day. And Wu's like, dude, you were dead yesterday. Like, what's going on here? But Lynn said to him, hey, I want to go out on a walk. You want to go on a walk with me, go to the temple? And Wu, he's looking at Lynn still like unable to comprehend what's happened here. But he's thinking, she does seem like she's in great health right now. And if she wants to go for a walk, great, I'll go with her. And so the two of them went outside and they began to walk. And as they're walking, Wu, he's a pretty athletic guy, remember? He found himself barely able to keep pace with Lynn, who was like speed walking towards the temple. And on top of that, as they're walking and Wu's like, gassed as he's trying to keep up with his wife, periodically neighbors would, wave to Lynn and Wu, and for just a brief second they would chat. And as Wu listened to Lynn speak, he began to notice something really strange. That Lynn, maybe he didn't notice it before, but he was definitely noticing it when she was speaking to other people. She just sounded different. Like her accent was different. It did not sound like his wife. And the weirdness around Lynn's miraculous recovery only got more weird over time. Before Lynn died and came back to life, she had been illiterate. But now, she was not only able to read, but she could also read and speak fluent Mandarin, a language she didn't know before she died. Also, Lynn used to be a really skilled cook who loved cooking meat dishes in particular. But now that Lynn has recovered, she no longer wanted to eat meat. She said she was a vegetarian and basically stopped cooking. Also, Lynn began speaking with real authority about the professions of accounting and bookkeeping. And then also she advised her husband to quit his job as an engineer and open up a building materials shop in town because there was a real need for it and he'd make real money that way. And believe it or not, like Wu, he doesn't understand what's going on with his wife, but she really seemed like a force to be reckoned with now. And however she had gained all this extra knowledge, it really seemed like she was sharp these days. And so he was like, okay, all right. And he quits his job as an engineer, opens up this building materials shop, and really quickly, he and his wife began making real money, more money than they had ever made before. And while all this was happening, Wu and Lynn became the biggest curiosity in town. The story of how Lynn had miraculously come back to life with all these bizarre personality changes, not only was that spreading all around town, but it eventually spread all across the country. It was like everybody was talking about Lynn. In fact, this story spread so far that it eventually reached the Taiwanese government. And when they heard about it, they were so intrigued, they decided they would investigate. And so on March 17th, 1962, the Taiwanese government sent for Lynn. And Lynn was very happy to go. She was ready to tell her story and answer any questions they had. This was all just kind of exciting. The idea that the government wanted to know how she had made this unbelievable recovery. And so the government, they scoop her up and they bring her to this army hospital and they tell her she's going to be meeting with the chief physician there. And so the chief physician, he's inside of the room, he's waiting for Lynn. He's never met her before. He's only been told roughly what the story is. There's this woman who's acting really funny after coming back from the dead, and okay, fine, I'm going to talk to her and see what's going on. And so Lynn, she walks in the room and the chief physician, he looks at her, she's an ordinary looking woman, and she walks over to him, and before he can even begin a line of questioning, Lynn looks at him like with a double take, like there's a moment of recognition, and she says to the chief physician, "Uncle?" And the chief physician is like, "Uncle? Why are you calling me uncle?" And then Lynn would go on to explain why she had just called him uncle, and the chief physician was so shocked by her story that he left the room and he called for his wife. And then when his wife came to the hospital, he didn't tell her what was going on. He just said, "Come with me." She walks into the room with the chief physician, he and his wife, and Lynn, who's never met this woman, and the woman has never met Lynn, they see each other for the first time, and Lynn looks at her and just goes, "Auntie." And it was at this point that Lynn revealed to the chief physician and his wife that Lynn really was not her name. That's what people called her, but that wasn't who she was. Her real name was Zhu Shuhua, and the chief physician and his wife literally couldn't believe it, because they had not given any information about their personal lives to Lin. They've only listened to her story, and she's just offered up what she claims her name is. She's called them uncle and auntie, and wouldn't you know it, the chief physician and his wife, they did have a niece whose name was Zhu Shuhua, and a year earlier, she, their niece, had gone missing. She had gone missing during the Chinese Civil War, and she had been presumed dead, but nobody had ever found her body. According to Lin, Zhu did die during that war. She was robbed and murdered by a group of fishermen. And then after she was killed, her spirit was sort of stuck in this purgatory for some time. But then, a year after Zhu's death, when Lin died, Lin said that Zhu's spirit entered Lin's body, and thus, she came back to life, Zhu did, but in a different body. And so Lin basically was telling the chief physician and his wife that she was Zhu. She had been reincarnated in Lin's body. And as crazy as this story sounded, the chief physician and his wife couldn't help but notice that as Lin was speaking, her accent was exactly like Zhu's. In fact, just generally speaking, Lin was acting exactly like their niece. She really did seem like the reincarnated version of Zhu. And then when they dug deeper and spoke more to Lin and also her husband Wu, the physician and his wife learned that, Lin, when she woke up and was reincarnated, suddenly she was a vegetarian, just like Zhu. Suddenly, Lin was interested in accounting and bookkeeping. Well, that was something that Zhu was interested in. And also, the biggest one was that Lin had been illiterate, but then she wakes up and suddenly she reads and speaks Mandarin fluently, the language that Zhu read and spoke. And so the chief physician, he couldn't help but start to believe that maybe Lin was telling the truth here. Maybe this really was his niece's reincarnated spirit. And so, as sort of strange as it was, he told the Taiwanese government that, you know what, there's something weird happening here, and, I can't help but believe that maybe there's some truth to this story. But if we really want to pressure test it, Lin claims that she knows who killed my niece. Like, she knows who killed her, because now she's Zhu. She said it was this particular group of fishermen. And actually, Lin had given the names of these fishermen that apparently robbed and killed Zhu. And so the chief physician told the government, why don't we investigate my niece's disappearance as a murder and go talk to those fishermen and see if that holds up. And so that's what the government did. They tracked these fishermen down, but unfortunately, only one of them was still alive. But they interviewed this guy, and Lin would actually say that particular fisherman, he was not one of the aggressors. He was actually the only fisherman in the group who tried to save Zhu, even though obviously she did get killed, but that fisherman had tried to stop what was happening to her. And when the government talked to him, he would say that, yes, unfortunately, she was killed, and I did try to stop it, but I just couldn't. Keep in mind, this fisherman had not been given any information. This is entirely like a brand new investigation. He has no idea what they know. But he basically exactly mirrored what Lin said happened. And so based on this, they actually closed Zhu Shuhua's case. It was labeled a disappearance. They changed it to a murder, and they labeled her killers as the fishermen who were deceased at the time. But they were labeled as her killers, and they closed the case based entirely on, a reincarnated spirit's testimony. And there's one more thing. Back in the beginning of the story, when Wu is hustling home, biking as fast as he can to get to his sick wife, and he has those weird encounters with his neighbors, well, it would turn out when those neighbors were interviewed, they would say that the reason they gave those looks to Wu, those looks of disgust and disdain, is because, one, they knew Wu was married to Lin, and they were also aware that she was sick in bed. But here comes Wu pedaling up the road, and he's got this woman sitting on the back of his bike that is clearly not his wife. And so everyone's reaction to that is, Wu is having an affair on his poor wife who's sick in bed. What a horrible person. Now, Wu swore there was no woman on his bike, but he would recall that the bike did feel really heavy, like he was pulling extra weight at the end there. Later, Lin would say that actually Zhu's spirit had come down and hopped on the back of Wu's bike, and it was her basically riding along, hitching a ride up to their house. She was the woman that the neighbors were seeing. But Wu, he was so focused on getting home, even though he felt that heavy weight, he never turned around, and so he didn't see her. And then once Lin passed away, Zhu's spirit, who was now at the home, sort of waiting for this to happen, she switched places with her. For the rest of her life, Lin would live as Zhu. and she would become a community and spiritual leader. And she would pass away in 2018 at the age of 97. And at her funeral, there would be banners hung that actually said both names, Lin and Zhu. And so if reincarnation is real, this story might just be one of the most credible cases ever recorded.
Nah, that's crazy.
That was a story.
That was a crazy story, man.
Yeah. Indeed it was. I was invested, Chad. Yeah, that was a crazy story, though. I didn't see that.
You did?
No, not the, the reincarnation thing. I didn't see all that coming. But, yeah, that was good.
Hey, man, y'all spam us up in the comments. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts about it for us in the comment section down below. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Cee Reacts To.
We are. We
Go
out.
and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar.